Welcome back. Another edition of the OG podcast. Going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to bring in the real OG, the original OGs when it comes to the voice of any team, whether it be NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB. The voice of the Texans, Marc Vandermeer, on the other side of the microphone as my guest during this OG podcast. Are you ready?
This is like a dream come true, ND. I feel like, is this like a fullback who might be an honorary offensive lineman? I'm an honorary OG because I've been here from the beginning. Is that accurate?
No. I don't like the word honorary OG. You're an OG.
I'm an OG.
You were here before I was here. I didn't get here until 2006. You were here before most of the
players. I will say this though. Mm-hmm. There's an advantage to being a broadcaster like me. I get to be here for all of it.
Yes.
You know? And I've gotten to call every game, and I've seen players kind of come and go. And I have mad respect for you guys. You know, I love seeing you. I love seeing the other Texans legends, community members, all of that. And I'm thinking, I still get to do this.
Yes.
So, yeah, I don't make the player bucks, but I've got the greatest job in the world because I get to be here maybe forever.
But
we'll see how it goes.
And that's why I think this makes you the perfect guest as we do something a little bit different in this episode of the OG podcast. But before we get started, and I'm sure you've told the story a million times, but I have to know, rock and roll. Was that planned or was it organic? Do you have a trademark for it? Kind of give me the story, because people that I talk to, when we hear rock and roll, we don't think of the music. We think of Marc Vandermeer and the Houston Texans doing something awesome on the field.
It started at Central Michigan. That was 3 jobs ago. Mm-hmm. All right. I was doing basketball and football, but it's a basketball call. It's dunks it, rock and roll. That's how I brought it in. And I brought it in because during the commercial breaks, I was doing those games by myself, and I would talk to the guy back at the studio. I'd say, hey, let's get ready to rock. You know, kind of fire us both up. And, you know, he was back in the studio, and I was the only guy there courtside. But I was just kind of getting the energy up, you know. And I just thought, let me put rock, the word, into the game. Mm-hmm. And one night I just said, dunks it, rock and roll, and it just took off. Nice. It took off for me anyway. And I started using it in football. I said, I think I could use this in football, too, for certain touchdowns. You can't do it for everyone. It's just going to get tired. And I didn't do it for every dunk either. Just like certain signatures, Mike Breen, who does NBA for ABC, ESPN, when somebody hits a three-pointer, he says, bang, right? Mm-hmm. And if a bunch of threes are hit in a row, it kind of sounds like there's just too many bangs here. Right, like you can't say rock and roll every time, and I don't. But I mixed it into touchdowns, and everywhere I've been, I've said this before, everywhere I've been, I went to UMass after Central Michigan, and I asked them, I said, you know, because they heard it on my tape. Mm-hmm. I said, I'll stop saying it if you want. They said, no, we love it. Miami, I go there. I'll stop saying it if you want. No, we love it here. I'll stop saying rock and roll, even though they basically invented rock and roll in Texas. I mean, you could argue that, debate that, but Buddy Holly in Lubbock, you know, that's early rock and roll. I mean, it's Easy Tops later, obviously. Okay. And rock and roll is just a, you know, derivative of the blues, you know, New Orleans and wherever, Mississippi Delta, all that stuff. So it's part of the area, right? It's rock and roll. So let's just say it. But they didn't mind, you know, the Texans and the radio station people at the time. They thought, it's a great call. Let's go with it. You know, keep using it.
You're a pro's pro. I would not have even thought to ask for permission because it's so energetic. And I know when I'm in my car listening to the game, if I can't get to a television, every time I hear rock and roll, I just smile. I just smile. Funny. So a couple questions regarding that. You said you don't use it for every touchdown. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming if the Texans are losing by 2 touchdowns and it's a late touchdown, you're not going to say rock and roll. Mm-hmm. But is there a time within the game when the game is still in reach for the Texans that you would not use it after a touchdown?
Well, all right, so since this is the OG podcast, so the very first touchdown in Texans history, so they're playing the Cowboys September 8th, 2002, I knew I will not say rock and roll. I don't care what it is. It is going to be a clean call for that touchdown. I don't want it to be about me because at the time I didn't know how long am I going to be here? Are they going to replace me? Whatever. I want it to be about them, not whatever my signature call is, the very first touchdown in team history. But the second touchdown, Corey Bradford going deep, rock and roll all day long. As far as what was the question again? Like, oh, when would I use it in a game? So
No, when would you not use it?
when would I not use it?
Yes.
You're right. In a blowout, end of the game, unless it was an amazing play,
Gotcha.
athletic, high degree of difficulty play. I would not use it, and I still don't use it in certain situations where it's a tough play to describe, maybe, or it's a play where it just doesn't warrant it. I think the rock and roll thing, it comes out where it's a long touchdown run or catch and run or an amazing play. I've even used it on defense sometimes if it's an incredible play. But if I said it already once in a game, it's rare I go twice with it, but I can. And last year I said it more than I've said it in years because, 2021 and 2022, even 2020, I wasn't saying it a whole lot, ND.
Well, you talked about last year, you said it a lot. I'm sure when you look at the plays and the players, it's obvious that they gave you many opportunities to say it. How excited are you about this upcoming season? Coming off what the Texans were able to accomplish. And you know what? Let me step back. When they brought in DeMeco Ryans, when they drafted C.J. Stroud, I think many people were optimistic, but they were cautious. How did the season go in regard to your prediction and your expectations?
It went much better. I thought they would be better. I mean, I knew they would be better with DeMeco and everything, but it got off to an 0-2 start. People forget that.
Yeah.
They were 0-2. Are you going to beat Jacksonville week 3? This is a tough team that just won the division, and not only did they beat them like a drum. So I thought, wait a minute. I wasn't thinking playoffs just yet.
Right.
I was thinking, look, let's just win a bunch of games. You know how this is. I try to look at it like the players and coaches, and that's one of the advantages of being in the building, is that you see what they go through every day, and you understand the mentality of, I really understand this clearly. After a game on Sunday, all right, you got to get through whatever it is, whether it's a win or a loss, and you celebrate the win. You got to get over the loss. But the very next day, it's bam, we're into next week already. Right. And so Monday, players and coaches have to answer questions about yesterday's game. You know this. The coaches have already not forgotten about it, but they've got to move on. If you're not focused on the next one, you might lose that one, win or lose in the last one, right? So I try to have that mentality as well of like, hey, let's get ready for next week. We got to go here. But, I do content, so we're going to talk about the game. That's what you have to talk about and get ready for the next one. So, I just think it's a big advantage being, in the building, being who I am for this stuff. And I thought during last year's season, after week 3, when they got into the Pittsburgh game and they demolished them, I thought this could be a playoff team. Could be. Now, you got a long way to go. But I thought at that moment, they have the talent because I knew they were undermanned. They started last season unhealthy. I remember going to the starting line thinking, who's available? We were having week 10 feelings on the injury report going into week 1. And then week 3, beat Jacksonville. Week 4, they're starting Austin Deculus at left tackle. He was no longer on the team later in the season. So I knew that once they get guys healthier, that it should get a lot better. But then they were battling injuries all season long. But, you saw the season. It was great. It was one of those unforgettable campaigns because he had so many down-to-the-wire games. And, doing what I do, that's the most exciting thing. I mean, you'd rather blow everybody out and have stress-free Sundays, really. But that was fun. That was so enjoyable.
You're so connected to the wins and losses. I even noticed it back when I played. Why is that? And I know that might sound like a weird question, but like I've seen you after losses, you're down like a player or a coach. I've seen you after victories, you're pumped up. Why are you so connected? Why don't you take the approach, hey, I just have to call a clean game and I've done my job?
I like drama. No, I'm an addict for the excitement, the adrenaline rush. This is why I haven't pursued a career being a national announcer. I don't like that. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. I've done games, Westwood won, NCAA tournament games. You know what you're rooting for? And you've done games where you have no rooting interest. Right. You're rooting for whoever is behind to catch up and make it a game. Yes. And then if they get ahead, now I want the other team to get ahead. That's why I was mentioning Mike Breen, Bang, and Gus Johnson and guys like that. They're great announcers. Don't get me wrong. Kevin Harlan, I love him. But they get excited for both teams. And I've always looked at that like, well, wait a minute. You were just excited for my team. Now you're excited for that team. Who are you rooting for here? Right. Well, you know who I'm rooting for. Now I'm not one of these guys, when the opponent scores against the Texans, I'm not one of these guys, touchdown Ravens. I don't do that. Right. because people are exerting themselves. And there's an effort out there that you have to respect. And I'm more disappointed. Oh, touchdown Ravens. Darn it. That kind of thing. So that's how I approach that. I love being the voice of a team. I live and die with the results. And you just mentioned that. And I think that's the fun of it, right? We're all sports fans. I'm a huge fan of what we're doing. And, I feel like we're in it. Andre, me, Johnny, we're in the game. Yeah. And there's just nothing like it. It really is the most exhilarating way to make a living in broadcasting, in my opinion. Now, other people might have other opinions.
Now, you talk about being in the game. As a player, the longer I was in the NFL, the game slowed down. I was able to get more comfortable. You talked about being at Central Michigan, being the only person calling a basketball game. That's hard. That's tough. So the stakes are much larger here calling games for the Texans. But is it easier than some of the jobs you had in the past leading up here?
It's easier because you get better at it as time goes on. It took a long time for me to get to a level of broadcasting football where I felt like, okay, now I'm getting good at it. Okay. And I'm 10 years. I'm not kidding. I didn't feel great about my football call for a long time. And I'm still working to get it better. I'm always trying to get better. You have to be the eternal student. Basketball, I always felt like was my best sport. And I don't know if football replaced it until maybe 10 years into this thing, honestly, because basketball, you have more reps anyway. I called a ton of high school games. Then I was at Central Michigan calling those games in UMass and Miami. You have 30 basketball games a year as opposed to whatever, 12 in college football games if you go to a bowl or whatever. And then the NFL, you get 20 of these a year. So it's hard to get to the level you want if that's all you're going to get, especially on radio, because radio is a tricky thing compared to TV. It's different. TV, you got to lay out. You're not describing as much. Right. When I've done TV games, and I've done some over the years, I find myself talking too much. I try to describe everything as if I'm on radio, and you got to throttle back, and that's really hard for me. Radio's great because I got to paint the whole picture. With Andre and Johnny, we got to paint the whole picture here. The teal-covered seats in Jacksonville with the swimming pools up at the upper deck to our left, things like that. You got to describe the environment. So it's a different animal altogether.
It's funny you say the description part of it, and I don't want to embarrass you. And I think I've told you this off air before, but I'll never forget a few years ago, my teenage son, we were listening to the game as we were running errands. And he was like, man, this guy's really good. I feel like I'm watching the game. And my idiot kids, they were teenagers. And, I never really hear them say something that
you guys don't know what you're talking about.
So to hear that, I was all, man, I can't wait to let Vandy know that even the teenagers appreciate the description part of it.
That's a big compliment. If somebody says that, the biggest compliments you can get if you're a radio play-by-play announcer are ones like that. People are in the car. I felt like I was seeing it. That's great. People who turn down the sound on their TV. Blind listeners, and they're out there. I mean, this is how they consume sports entertainment. They've got to listen to the radio calls so they understand what's going on, and they will let you know how good you are. Right. They will let you know if they're seeing the game, the mind's eye is seeing the game the way you describe it or not. And that, when you get a compliment from somebody who's visually impaired, and my grandfather was blind, and he never lived long enough for, to hear me, but I always thought about this because he said, well, better blind than deaf. He always thought that it was the most wonderful thing to be able to hear music. You could still consume so much media, entertainment. Radio in his day was, the Lone Ranger, or, that kind of stuff, all the visual radio programs that you had. I say visual because it's a hot medium. You're describing something. It's theater of the mind. I love radio, N.D. This is my medium. And people talk about podcasting. To me, it's all radio. It's the same thing. It's audio, right? And in many ways, they talk about radio's not a healthy business. Well, it's just different. It's healthier than ever in many ways. Everybody's got a radio show. We just call it a podcast, and it's consumed digitally. It's just terrestrial radio's changed so much.
Now, has it changed what you have to do in preparation?
To call a play-by-play broadcast, no. Okay. That is the same. To do shows, it's different. It's funny because you listen to a lot of podcasts and they're low energy to me.
Yes.
You know, a lot of these podcasters, they would not make it in radio because you got to bring the heat in radio, terrestrial radio. You're talking to people in their cars. You want to engage them. You want to keep the audience. You got to keep the audience through a commercial break. Podcast break, very often you're just zipping right through those ads. Sorry, advertisers. Sometimes you're listening. And look, I could talk about radio for days. The podcast ads have to get it right, just like the radio ads do, in that you've got to be entertaining in your audio commercials, just like your TV commercials. Very often the TV commercials are the best thing on TV, production value-wise. They put a lot of thought into this. Think of a Super Bowl ad. You got to make these things entertaining, and very often they're not. And that's where they fall flat. That's where traditional media just totally fails. You got to make those ads entertaining if that's what's going to drive the business.
All right, I'm going to go a little bit off script because I thought of you the other day because I know you're a music lover. I know you play the guitar. If I'm not mistaken. So I was watching Netflix and I went down this rabbit hole. And for you music lovers, apparently it was uncool to like Nickelback. So I watched their documentary, then I listened to their music. I kind of like it. So as a musician, I'm going to get your take on Nickelback.
They're very catchy, hard pop, Nickelback.
Ooh, hold on. That's what do you call it? I think you kind of just backhanded compliment saying hard pop. Well, they consider themselves rock stars.
All right, it's rock, but it's pop. It's popular rock. Pop to me is just popular music, right? I think.
What's Metallica?
That's heavy metal. But that's kind of the true heavy metal heads will say they love Metallica and they respect the tradition. But I know guys who are into some really way out stuff in the metal genre, and that's not really my thing. Like Metallica, I respect them. That's not really my thing. I'm more classic rock, Zeppelin. When I talk about hard rock, it's Deep Purple, live, of course, not the really old stuff, but live, Made in Japan, Zeppelin. Stuff like that. To me, Metallica, that's a half generation later. Awesome stuff. I mean, that's one of the most popular and successful bands ever. But I think when we talk about music, because I go back to being a kid, when I was 15, 16 years old, I gave away all my Zeppelin albums at one point, all my rock albums, and said, you know what? I'm done with this. Jazz is the real music. I literally did that. And then about a year later, I was like, can I get my Zeppelin albums back? Pink Floyd, can I get that back? I mean, I love jazz, but I just went through a whole Miles Davis and John Coltrane and all these jazz guys. And I said, this is the real music. And I was right. It is fantastic music, but it's all good. When we talk about music very often, it's people are like, who's the greatest guitarist ever? Well, Jimi Hendrix comes up. He's the greatest rock guitarist ever. When you have jazz guitar and classical, these are completely different genres. So you have to say the classic rock guitarist sometimes in order to really paint the picture. Best vocalist, Mick Jagger, Freddie Mercury. Yeah, they're outstanding. Luciano Pavarotti might be a better vocalist than those guys, but we're not talking about him, right? Bocelli, he's awesome, but we're not going to put him in the Freddie Mercury conversation.
Isn't that more of an opinion? Like Freddie Mercury, I can understand. I also, years ago, watched the Queen documentary and about his life. His voice is amazing. Even as a guy, like that's not my favorite genre.
Right.
I'm more hip-hop, Southern hip-hop. But you have to respect his voice. But when they have those discussions, we used to have them in the locker room to bring it back to the OG podcast. I mean, guys would be ready to go to blows when you start talking about who's the best rapper, Tupac or Biggie. Then I would always jump in with Scarface and the guys who aren't from the South.
Oh, they'd go nuts.
To fight. Yeah, so, but when you really
who is the best
back,
rapper?
Oh, Scarface.
Okay.
That's actually a fact. It's not an opinion.
It's not an opinion.
Yeah, but with everyone else, you would think it's an opinion. Like, you know what? If you really appreciate Freddie Mercury's voice, then more power to you.
Yeah. So there's another category, frontman, right? Who's the best frontman? Because that would be the lead singer, not necessarily voice, but performer, combination of everything.
Axl Rose.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's awesome. But I think he's derivative of these earlier guys like Jagger, Steven Tyler, Robert Plant, people like that. And Axl is his own guy, but Guns N' Roses, to me, in the 80s, they were already a throwback band. They were already a band that was hearkening to another era of rock music. And I respect them. Slash is amazing. The catalog speaks for itself.
Right. Yeah, okay, I just wanted to get your take on that because when I was listening to Nickelback, I know it's supposed to be cool to diss them, and I'm like, you know what? I know this isn't my area of expertise, but I kind of like them. The guy has a pretty cool voice.
There's a reason why they've sold so many
Exactly.
albums. Remember Milli Vanilli?
Oh, geez, blame it on the rain.
Okay, so Milli Vanilli, everybody makes fun of them, right? Because it was a sham. Those two guys didn't sing the songs. We all know the story. But somebody bought those albums, man.
Oh, yeah.
That thing went multi-platinum, that very catchy tunes. And it's funny how rock or pop or whatever that is such a package deal between the visual, because the videos help sell the songs, the visual and the audio. Because I know the people, Milli Vanilli, those two guys came out with another album where they sang, and it was terrible, right?
Yes.
And the people who actually performed the songs, I think they came out with another album, but it didn't sell.
Exactly.
And I think everyone's turned off at that point. But man, those songs were really good. There's a reason
you're
why
right.
people bought all those albums.
People won't admit it, but if you hear "Blame It on the Rain" right now in
you'd be
your
like-
car, you're either gonna tap your feet or kind of hum along with
But they
it.
have like 6 top 10 hits or some ridiculous number from that album.
They crushed it for like a span of 2 to 3 years.
See, I love like football music. To me, there are a lot of parallels here because I was having a discussion with somebody about guitarists, and Jeff Beck, for instance. This is an old classic rock, and he did fusion too. Guitarist who's awesome, and well, is he really a top 3, top 5 guy? I'm like, well, maybe not, but it doesn't mean he's not excellent.
Right.
Is Ben Roethlisberger a top 5 quarterback all time? No, but he's amazing. Is Brett Favre top 5 all time? I don't think so, but he's amazing, right? People can be amazing, but not top 5 all time.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean they suck. And that's why when we get into these, like, who's the best quarterback? Who's the best receiver? Who's the best musician? There are a lot of ways to interpret this stuff.
I'm 100% with you. All right, let's bring it back to football. I want you to finish these 3 sentences. Most excitement going into a season since. So this year, this is the most exciting going into a season since.
I'm going to say 2012. Because 2011, you're coming off the first playoff appearance. Schaub gets hurt after week 10, and now Schaub's back in the offseason, and you're thinking, all right, now you got Schaub. You should have gone to the Super Bowl or could have gone to the Super Bowl if you had Schaub. That game in Baltimore, Yates throws 3 picks, Jacoby fumbles the ball, muffs the punt. You have 4 turnovers, and you lose by 7. I mean, that was amazingly close. If you have Schaub, you might win.
Right.
Now you go to New England, whatever. So going into 2012, I thought was fever pitch excitement at the time. And people said, well, what about 13? Because you're coming off 12-4 going into the 2013 season. I said, yeah, but you lost 3 out of 4 down the stretch in 2012. And there were a lot of doubts about, could this team even get back to 12 wins? And they didn't. They only won twice. So I think the offseason excitement in 2012 was number 1 until now. This is even greater than that because they got back to a division-winning mode so quickly. But it's not just that they did that. If Shane Steichen was the coach and they did exactly what they did last year, I don't think it would be the same as D'Amico doing it.
Right.
There was a magical thing that happened when you hired D'Amico Ryans. And you saw it. Everybody saw it. All the OGs came back home, right? They all came back home. And the love, the feeling was unlike anything I've ever seen here. And look, it's a young franchise, and people don't want to hear that. It's the youngest franchise in the league, literally. We're going into year 23 here. So I know our history very well. You know this. And I just look back and say, this is unbelievable. We've never seen anything like it. To have one of your own coaching your team, it doesn't always work out.
Right.
Bart Starr in Green Bay. I mean, we can go on. But it's working out really well so far. And you kind of knew it would with him. I just felt it would. I knew he was a good coach. You know this. I mean, he was a teammate of yours. I always thought when he played that he would make a great coach based on the leadership qualities that everybody talked about back then. All the players, all the coaches, everybody talked about it. The question is, would he want to do it? N.D., I think you'd make a great coach. Would you want to do it? No, you're shaking your head. You
Right.
wouldn't want to do it.
Right.
You know what it takes, right? Andre Ware, he's got great, he coaches basketball, does a hell of a job.
Yes, he does.
But he knows that whatever time he's spending on basketball, and believe me, I see him on the plane, like on these programs and drawing up plays and everything on the iPad. But that's just a fraction of what it would take to be successful in college or pro football. So he knows, I don't want to do it. But DeMeco wanted to do it. And DeMeco is awesome at it. And I think that makes a ton of difference. You add that to C.J. Stroud, and I think the whole combination, the chemistry, the band is all working together. Everybody's playing in unison here. Nick Caserio drafting well in 2021. Oh, Nico Collins. Well, look at him now, right? Yeah. 2022's class, and now 2023. And you draft the offense and defensive rookie of the year. Everyone's talking about how DeMeco got robbed not being coach of the year, and I agree. Mm-hmm. Nick got robbed not being executive of the year. I mean, Nick is executive of the year. You draft second, draft a quarterback who ends up being rookie of the year, and then move up to 3 and draft the defensive rookie of the year. That is a total freaking home run. You cannot do better than that. And those who complained, like, well, did you overpay for Will Anderson? He became defensive rookie of the year. Right. What a start. So to me, all that leading into this offseason where they acquired Diggs and Danielle Hunter, and the list goes on, and Azeez Al-Shaair, all those acquisitions, this is incredible excitement. And everywhere you go, people are talking about it. Everywhere I go, people are talking about it. Now you got to go do it. Yeah. So this is what makes me nervous. Now you got to go do it.
Not to take anything, and I want to revisit the nervous because I have some of those same nerves. Mm-hmm. Not to take anything away from Nick Caserio because I agree with what you stated. But is that executive of the year or ownership of the year? Because I'm assuming the one thing I've never been a part of that I want to do at some point is be in a war room on draft day. Yeah. But I'm assuming, and tell me if you know different, that a general manager will have to go to the owner and say, hey, I'm thinking about spending more of your money and moving up in the draft.
Yeah, I think – well, I don't know about that. I think that's something they discussed previously because Cal, we actually have the video of Cal in the car on the way to the draft party. It's either on the way to the party or the stadium that day. And Cal's saying, yeah, we might trade down or we might move up. Something that I'm semi-paraphrasing here. So he knew all the scenarios. And I think Cal is like Bob McNair in that, hey, let the football guys do their thing. Unless it's completely ridiculous or, I'm sure they run things by him. But I think he's very empowering that way. I think the McNairs N.D., I can't say enough about what they've meant here the last few years as the organization's been on the rise and all the little moves that have taken place on and off the field and the whole rebrand and everything. It's working out swimmingly well. I have never seen, and I've been in the building all the time, never seen football ops, business ops, and for those who don't know, business is, marketing, ticketing, all this other stuff, along with the football operations side, which operates unto itself because the football ops, and I know you know this, the football ops side, you have... It's kind of like Washington. Business ops are the people who are always going to be there, and the football ops are the people who are the elected officials who may or may not be there for a long time. Who knows? Who knows? And I've never seen such synergy between the two and ownership. Everything's just going together so well. And we've had good times here, but these are the best of times, and I think they're going to get better, but you got to go do it, like we said.
Speaking of the nerves, not to be a Debbie Downer, and this is not part of the 3 questions, but you said certain things make you a little bit nervous when things are going so well for so long in the offseason. With the expectations, with the team exceeding expectations last year, do you think if they kind of not take a step back but move at the pace we all expected them to this season, would that be a downer?
Well, yeah, and this is a great question, great subject, because if you get to the divisional round again and lose, and obviously there's going to be context to that, how did you lose? Who did you lose to? What was the situation? Were you at home? Were you not at home? Those kinds of things. But we all know how tough it is to get there to that divisional round. It's brutally hard. I think the division is way harder than people think. People who are assuming, you're picked to finish first in the AFC South, so that'll happen. Right. Really? Really? The Colts have done nothing. The Jags have done the Colts have done more than the Jags. But the Jags won 9 games and coulda, woulda, shoulda won 10. The Colts could have beaten you, and they didn't. That doesn't mean you're anointed the division championship going into the season. And you know this. I mean, you got guys who play understand this better than anybody. It's about like, are you going to win week 1? Are you going to win week 2? Week 3? Let's just build it. You got to stack those wins. To get to 10 is monumentally difficult. Are they going to do that again? I feel good about them doing it, but you got to go out and perform against this schedule. And I think one thing that doesn't get discussed enough is this is the first time they finished first in the division with the 17-game schedule in play. That means that you have 3 games that are affected by where you finish in the division. 2 in the conference and 1 out of conference. So it's Dallas, it's Kansas City, and Baltimore. What a trio of games of opponents that you have to take on because that's your reward for finishing first, right?
Right.
So last year, they didn't have that. And it just makes things that much more difficult when you're playing those really good teams, and we'll see how they handle it.
You know, not even the really good teams make me nervous. I'm expecting the Texans to win the division again, but easier said than done. Trevor Lawrence might finally look like what we expected out of Trevor Lawrence. Like, that's not that big of a – that wouldn't be that big of a surprise.
What about Anthony Richardson?
That was my – I wrote his name down. Anthony Richardson might live up to a healthy Anthony Richardson. So, yeah, that's why I'm always cautiously optimistic when it comes to any NFL team. Like, there's teams that the casual fan, and this isn't a knock on casual fans, they might just say, oh, Texas is going to be better than Jacksonville, better than Indianapolis. But just like you mentioned, Anthony Richardson might be the second coming of Lamar Jackson, and Trevor Lawrence might finally live up to the huge contract that they just awarded him with.
Yeah. Think about Lamar Jackson in his rookie year, 2018. Yeah. He came in to replace Flacco, and they were having an season at best. Yep. They were talking about firing Harbaugh, not the Ravens, but people on the outside. Then Jackson comes in, and he wasn't throwing it that well yet, but he made the difference. They made the playoffs, lost to the Chargers in the playoffs. If Richardson plays that well, that could be a really tough team to beat because they don't have Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and whoever else the Ravens have been throwing out there in recent years. They've got Jonathan Taylor, and they've got other weapons, and they've got defensive interior guys who are fire-breathing dragons. I mean, that is a tough team. I think people are sleeping on the Colts. It's going to be tough. You have 3 teams with winning records in this division. It's not getting enough credit. It's not getting enough credit it's not getting enough attention that this could be a problem. The Texans could be really good and still have it be a problem to win the division. It's just that tough.
Well said. All right, second question kind of goes along with what we've been talking about. The Texans will make the playoffs if?
Well, record aside, CJ stays healthy.
Okay.
You keep the quarterback healthy, I think they're going to go places.
Okay.
I know he missed a couple of games last year. We all saw it. 17-game schedule. I don't know how you feel about this, ND, but I feel like it's almost a miracle if somebody goes 17. You know, it's just so tough. And when we go to 18, oh my gosh, how are they going to do that? But we'll deal with that later. If CJ can play 15, 16 games, I feel really good about their chances to get back to the playoffs. Just no matter what else happens.
Right.
But if you have an injury epidemic on the O-line.
Hold that thought, because this third question
All right, go ahead.
All right. Besides the quarterback, who is the one guy that the Texans need to be healthy for the entire season?
That's a great question. You know, you have to pick one, huh?
Just one, besides the quarterback. And we know in the grand scheme of things, everybody's important. But who's the one outside of CJ that you're like, stay healthy the entire season?
This is not to say that the other guys aren't important. I got a feeling that Derek Stingley Jr. has to stay healthy, because if he doesn't, you have this domino effect at corner where, oh, wait a minute, you know, now, look, Lassiter looked good in OTAs with this rookie in OTAs, all right? Let's get to the regular season. Okudah, Henderson trying to resurrect things or get to where they wanted to be when they were originally drafted. You're going to get thin there in a hurry.
Yes.
So Stingley, the playmaking ability, if he stays healthy and continues to climb like I think he will, you're looking at half the field is shut down kind of guy.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's maybe hyperbole, but there's a lot to that. Like, we can't throw to Stingley.
Right.
You know, look at what he did. That pick against Denver. That was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Johnny called it the catch of the year.
I like that. I'm sure Nico would be like, hold on, but I like that.
Yeah, I mean, but there's something to be said about that,
Right.
that's in the conversation because it was that good. You know, the ball's not intended for you, but you go up and take it away with that degree of difficulty. That was fantastic.
That's actually the guy. I went back and forth with Laramie Tunsil and Stingley, but I feel like Stingley has to be, even for his own trajectory with his career, to let people know, hey, I can be on the field for 17 games.
I'll give you another guy, Joe Mixon. I think now if Damian becomes 2022 Damian again, and I'm all for it, let's see it. I think Mixon is really important to this team. Mixon is a better back than what they were producing last year, right?
Yes.
So I believe that Joe's going to have a really good campaign. I hope Damian gets back to it. I love Damian just as a person, and I loved his playmaking ability. And even last year, he showed that to you. Kickoff returns are going to be, that's a whole other story, by the way. I mean, we've talked about that this offseason. That is going to be discussed. You wait till the Hall of Fame game the next morning, every sports talk show in America. What about these kickoffs?
Right.
That will be a major topic. And in every football building, they're going to be talking about what they saw in that game, because that's the first guinea pig game for the new kickoff rules.
That's a good prediction.
Oh, yeah.
I think every radio host,
like
like you said, that's going to be what they're talking about
because,
after that.
You know, they're not going to play Caleb Williams in that game, I wouldn't think.
No.
And the Texans would not play CJ, I wouldn't think, in that game. What's the focus on? You know, so I bring that up to paint the picture that you're not going to have wholesale injuries in that game. I would hope not for either team. But the kickoff rule, that is brand new. That's going to look very different from what you've been seeing as a fan on your screens for the last forever, you know, because nobody watched the XFL by and large compared to an NFL audience. But you can bet the special teams coordinators have. They watched that XFL stuff from years prior to this to find out what was going to transpire, how to best handle the new kickoff rules.
With that being said about the new kickoff rules, do you play your starting special teams unit so they get a feel for it?
I don't know. I think a lot of those guys will play. Yeah.
And I know some people listening are like, special teams, but believe me, you have some special teams demons that we call them that are thought of as offense, defensive type starters where they get those breaks. But I'm wondering if in that first preseason game, they say, no, you got to play because we want you to get comfortable with this new rule.
As far as the kickoff goes, if they were going to use, say, Tank Dell, which I doubt they would, they wouldn't use him in that game, you know, and maybe not even Pierce. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. I don't know.
That's going to be interesting. That's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
So you won't be on the TV call for the Hall of Fame game, but you will be for the next week at Pittsburgh when we have the follow-up performance. So I can't wait to hear you and Kevin.
Are you focused during those games when you call them in the preseason on what you have to do as the voice of the Texans, or are you focused on what you want to see from the team?
A little bit of both, you know, because as the play-by-play announcer, you got to call the balls and strikes. You know, you have to describe what is happening on the field. And people are saying to me all the time, if there's a blowout loss, oh, that must have been a tough game to call. People think that those are really hard, and they are hard to take as far as the result of the game. But during the game, I'm not feeling it. You know when I'm going to feel it? Texans Monday, 8 to 10 a.m., Monday morning. That's when we have to, like, dissect, discuss. During the game, first down, here's another play. I'm calling the action, you know, and Andre has time to opine a little bit. And look, it's a bummer to get blown out. 2021, they had something like 4 blowouts in a row, big ones. That was really painful. But I still love what I do. I love being on the mic. I love game day. Love the anticipation, the build up. You know, you don't want to get drilled like that, like they did in Indy and Arizona and the Rams here. You don't want that, but you're always excited about the prospect of it changing. You know, let's get into the game. Let's see what they can do today. It's always fun.
Speaking of excitement, the Dallas Cowboys taking on the Texans in a regular season game. Just kind of talk about what that means to you.
Oh, man. They live among us, don't they? The Cowboy fans. Yes. And I was on vacation. I was in Mexico, and I was on the elevator. I had a Texans TV shirt on. He said, "Oh, Texans TV. What do you do for Texans TV?" And I said, "I just do some." I wasn't like, I didn't.
I'm the voice guy, dog. Don't you know me?
Well, they're from Dallas.
Oh, okay.
You know, and I said I work with them broadcasting. Like, well, what do you do? Like, they were really asking. So I said, "Yeah, radio play-by-play announcer." Like Brad Sham, I love Brad Sham. He's the voice of the Cowboys. I'm like, yeah, I'm like Brad Sham, except a little younger, a little better. I'm just kidding, Brad. I love you, Brad.
No, he's not.
Brad is he's a legend. He was on the field, part of the radio crew, I guess doing sideline or something, during the catch, Montana to Dwight Clark.
Oh, wow.
Sham he's part of the broadcast crew for that legendary game. That's incredible stuff. Now, I know they lost, but thank goodness. I know they lost, but to go back that far with that franchise is just incredible. So, yeah, the history of the Cowboys, it's amazing. I love picking on them because it's been so long since they've done anything meaningful. When the Cowboy fans, the younger ones especially, stick their chests out and start saying, oh, the Cowboys. What? Yeah. You're not living up to your own standard of excellence. You've been to 8 Super Bowls. You've won 5. Now, you haven't done anything in over a quarter century, but have a little dignity because you've got a proud history, but you've been terrible by your own standards since then. And the Texans have more playoff victories than you since we started going to the playoffs, since we started the franchise. More playoff victories than the Cowboys. Now, that is not the scoreboard that we all want. The scoreboard we want is championships. Right. But I'll take it for now because it's all I got against them. So thank you.
Is the NFL missing something, or are we being too myopic by not making sure the Texans play the Cowboys every year?
All right, so this is a great one. I've long suggested to no one's attention that when they go to 18 games, what they should do is designate in the opposite conference a couple of rivals. Now, sometimes you'd have to change this year to year because you might be playing that rival's division and you'd play them anyway, right? But I always felt like, wouldn't it be great if the Texans could play the Saints and the Cowboys every year? Yes. This does multiple things. Regional rivalry, it's great. Fans can travel to those games between these 3 cities. I think the Cowboys should play the Saints every year. But a lot of people would feel like, we want to play Dallas every year. I think everybody in the league would love to play Dallas every year. And that's a credit to them because you either love them or you hate them. They're polarized and they're going to fill your building. That's the way it is, and I give them credit for that. But for the Texans to play the Saints and the Cowboys, and I think we should do it every preseason too, if we can, because our fans will go to New Orleans for a preseason game. They love it. Yes. They'll go to Dallas for a preseason game. Absolutely love it. And the Cowboy fans will fill this building, and the Saints fans as well, in the preseason. So let's have at it.
I like it. I like it. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Any parting shots for your first time in the OG podcast?
It's an honor to be part of the OG podcast, N.D., because I'm a big fan of the OG podcast. The one with Antonio Smith is ridiculously good, all right? Amon Green, I love that you had Amon Green on because Amon Green, to me, I know it didn't work out here, but you want to talk about hope. There was a lot of hope in 2007. You signed Amon Green, you traded for Schaub. Those two were kind of on the cover of everything that preseason. You started out 2-0. There was so much excitement, but then the wheels came off because Andre got hurt, Schaub got hurt. But you did finish 8-8 for the first time. So anyway, that's a great one. They're all great. OD, when you talk to the guys about what it's like when you first stop playing, that stuff is, you can hear a pin drop. Everybody listens to that. It's riveting stuff. Everybody wants to hear that material. So
no, that means a lot. And it's, you've heard, so I remember as a player, the older guys who were retired and they would come back and visit, they would always try to warn us and say, hey, you got to mentally be ready for this. And you have that mentality, I'm going to play forever. But then when you're out of it and you start talking to other guys who are out, it's like, okay, we all went through the same struggle. So I always try to allow them to talk about that when they come into the podcast.
It's great, and they really open up to you. Thanks a lot for having me on.
All right, appreciate you joining us. That's the voice, the original voice, and the only voice of the Houston Texans, Marc Vandermeer. Keep it right here.